and she looked me in the eye and said, "I'll love you no matter what." That's not only what she said, but it's what she didn't say. That somehow sparked that change in me. So
one of my former students is Joyner Lucas, who is doing amazing things in the music industry. One of the fastest rising hip hop artists. He's in movies now, and it's been great watching his meteoric rise through entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, failing often is like, I have this ready, fire, aim mentality where I say, okay, like, we're going to start a podcast. I literally said to Dennis, like, in January, I'm like, yeah, we're going to start a podcast. Can you imagine, like, I would never have known 4 years ago that we would have had a podcast that we now have, 12,500 followers in 6 weeks.
And for myself, most recently, I embarked on a transformation myself. Lost about 60 pounds over the last 4 months, which is, for myself, is change and kind of brings me here today. And for the last 4 months, Bob and I have been doing some really, really good stuff together. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so for me, I was actually born in Ohio.
Oh, that's true. I forgot about that little footnote.
And welcome to the Apex Lifestyles Podcast. I'm your host, Bob GDMD, and I'm here as always with my co-host,
Dennis V. What's going on today, Bob?
Hey, we're having a great Sunday.
Awesome Sunday.
We just got back from Mohegan Sun last night. We were watching our friend Demick Hightower Edmonds. He went and defeated his opponent in an arena. He did a great job. Pro boxing. He fought as a heavyweight, which is normally a cruiserweight, but the other guy, he couldn't make weight, so he's fighting up. So it's pretty cool.
He had a great challenger. Demick knocked him down in the first round, and the guy came back, fought 6 rounds in a great split decision, 6-round victory. Very proud of him.
Very proud of him. It was a great fight. It was really fun, and it was great to see him living his life at the Apex. Today we have an incredible guest. He's coming in from UMASS Amherst. He's an aspiring businessman. He's going to be graduating.
Whoa. Sorry, the mic just got close there. Record scratch. Today, I thought in the email I was supposed to interview you and Dennis.
Oh, you're taking it
That's exactly what I'm doing. Yes, you're a pirate on pirate radio. If we were back in the 80s, pirate radio.
Flipping the script.
That's exactly what I'm going to do.
All right, you ready for that, Dennis?
Always ready. This is good. This is real good.
All right.
Well, my name is Joshua Gauthier. I'm actually son of Dr. Gauthier, so I've had the inside look kind of at the minds behind this podcast, but I've never really gotten to know Dennis very well, so I thought I would come out here from the great University of Massachusetts at Amherst and ask a couple questions in the Socratic collegiate way that I can.
Hold on. I'm going to flip the script on the flip script. So
that's like 3 flip scripts.
It is. It is.
I like it.
So our interviewer, by the way, is just finished up as the vice president of the student government over at UMass. I got to give some props. Joshua is my son, so I'm very, very proud of him.
Outstanding.
So double major. He's going to be finishing up at the Honors College as well, grabbing a certificate there. So 2 bachelor's degrees, an Honors College certificate. He's actually writing a thesis in the Honors College, which I'm hoping he's going to turn into a book, and it's really, really interesting.
Hoping. We'll see. But this isn't about me. This is about Robert and Dennis, which sounds weird to say Robert. I think you're more like Dad, but I feel like that would sound a little bit Nepo baby there. So we'll just keep it at Dr. Gauthier. But I had a couple questions. I've been an avid listener of your podcast, so if you'll allow me to do a little bit of a Socratic method here,
cool.
I'll ask you a couple questions so your audience can know a little bit more about the minds behind the Apex lifestyle.
Sounds great.
Sounds great.
So my first question for you both is, I feel like I haven't really been able to know your backstories more thoroughly, and I think I would love to know, can you condense for me the last 50 years into 2 minutes? I know that's a lot, but can you tell me the stories of kind of, what was it like growing up, and I believe you both grew up in Massachusetts. What was it like growing up in Massachusetts? What kind of brought you to this position today? Where'd you go in your careers, and kind of now, what brought you to kind of creating this podcast today?
So you want a 2-minute elevator pitch of our lives.
That's exactly what I'd like.
All right.
I like that.
All right, Dennis, why don't you start off?
Born and raised in Mystic, Connecticut, actually. Second oldest of 8 children. We all start with the letter D. Obviously, my name's Dennis. And came to Massachusetts in 1990 to Anna Maria College. Wanted to be an elementary education teacher. Eventually, I turned over into special education. Always knew I wanted to help people. Just didn't know to what level I wanted to help. For the past 30 years, I've been an educator, special educator in the Worcester school system, adjunct college professor and director of Student Success Center at Anna Maria College. So I've lived my life helping others reach their fullest potential, which just makes me happy and makes me kind of thrive and drive. I've run a couple foundations, national foundations, Autism Changes and Autism Acceptance Worldwide. Took it national, trying to help spread the word and spread awareness for individuals with autism. And for myself, most recently, I embarked on a transformation myself. Lost about 60 pounds over the last 4 months, which is, for myself, is change and kind of brings me here today. And for the last 4 months, Bob and I have been doing some really, really good stuff together. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so for me, I was actually born in Ohio.
Oh, that's true. I forgot about that little footnote of history. I was
born in Ohio. My father was a Air Force officer, and he was stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Moved here when I was about 3. Lived at Hanscom Air Force Base until I think it was 1981 or 82. Then I moved to the next town over, actually. Went through my, high school as any normal kid would, and went into, I was a music major at University of Massachusetts Lowell campus. Played in a rock and roll band, had long hair when I had hair, it was long. Played in a hair metal band, I was a guitar player. We were actually featured on local radio, WAAF at one point, which was really kind of fun. Got to know a lot of people in the music industry, and then one day, the band, as they do, broke up, and I needed to get a real profession, so I went back to school, and in the interim between being a rock and roll guy and being, who I am today, there was a stint where I was a personal trainer and worked at a Gold's Gym and was personal training, running those gyms, and then went back to school and became a dentist, of all things. It's kind of a circuitous road, but I'm going to keep this to the Cliff Notes version. Opened this practice, had 2 kids, had a marriage. The marriage went south, the kids went great, so that's a good thing out of that. But yeah, now I have this practice. In between the time that I graduated from dental school and probably about 4 years ago, I had gained about 200 pounds. Stopped taking care of myself the way that I needed to, and things came to a head, and I decided that it was time for a change. I was helping people feel good about the way they looked and the health of their oral cavity, their face, and all of that. And I forgot about myself, and I didn't take care of myself the way I should have. So 4 years ago, I embarked on this transformation journey and have lost 200 pounds and kind of reeled in my staff and their spouses to do a challenge with me, and this is where Dennis and I kind of put this thing together. And it was a Christmas party back in 2023, just this past Christmas, that I laid down the gauntlet, and Dennis jumped in.
December 15th, looked me in the eyes and said, "Are you in?" And yeah, glad I accepted the challenge, and it's been no looking back.
Yeah, so that's where we're here now today. We want to help others reach a pinnacle in their lives where they feel that they've defined what they think of as success and have gone and taken the steps to go do it. And part of the reason this podcast exists is so that we can, champion those people, celebrate them, everywhere from, people, top celebrities, all the way to everyday folks who, are on their way. And you say it all the time. You're talking about how, you see the end result, right? But we want to discuss the path going there. And it's not always a smooth one. No,
and it's something I picked up and you said, and I was thinking is the self-reflection. Both of us have chosen paths of our lives where we help others, but both of us kind of lost track of our path. When you talk about taking care of yourselves and along the way of reaching your personal apex, that happens. And I think that's one of those obstacles that you and I have both had to overcome, and you continue to overcome. Yep. So it's something to remember along the way.
Yep. for sure.
That's interesting. And so there was something in there. So I know I asked you a big kind of macro question there, and I'd like to kind of dial into a more microscopic question here. You had mentioned that there was a moment about 3 years ago when you decided today's the day that I'm going to go.
4 years ago.
4 years ago. That you said today's the day that I'm going to go and lose this weight that I've been carrying for so long. Dennis, you had mentioned a similar moment. You were at the Christmas party, and Dad, my father had said, are you in? And you said, yes, I'm in. Can you tell me a little bit about those moments? I think you've mentioned them as saying like paradigm shifts in your life. Can you tell me about that specific paradigm shift in your life? What is that point? Because and I'll kind of ask Dennis that question in a similar way, but for you specifically, can you tell me about that moment when you said, enough is enough, now I'm going to lose the weight?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's a loaded one. So for me, we actually, Dennis and I have some really interesting projects coming up. We're going to kind of keep it at that. There's some projects that we have coming, and
they're coming
within the next week or two. One of them is going to be dropping, which is kind of interesting and
exciting.
Fun. Exciting. We'll talk about that at a subsequent day. But for me, and Joshua, about some of this because of you lived it. My marriage with your mom didn't really work out because part of that, or the big part of that, was that I was not able to show up in that marriage in the way that I should have, right? And I basically let my body, go, so to speak. And she lost physical attraction to me, and I understand that, right? I get that, and that's the part I own of that whole thing. But during that divorce period, I lost some weight, but for the wrong reasons, right? I didn't eat. I couldn't eat. I was there's too much nerves associated with that. So I lost some weight. I was able to attract my current significant other during that time. And then after I got comfortable with her, the weight came back because I didn't change anything, right? That was just a snapshot in time where I was extremely stressed, had a lot of anxiety, all of that, and I lost the weight because my body couldn't handle, right, the food coming in because of the anxiety. I didn't change anything, gained the weight and then some, right? And I got over 400 pounds at one point. And I said to my significant other, I said, hey, does this bother you? And she looked me in the eye and said, I'll love you no matter what. That's not only what she said, but it's what she didn't say. That somehow sparked that change in me. Said, today's the day. And I knew how much work I was going to have to do. Because like I said before, I was a personal trainer. And I rode crew collegiately. So I was an athlete. I knew what it took. It used to take 4 hours a day of 4 to 6 hours a day of exercise. And I know I didn't have 4 to 6 hours a day of exercise in me now because of all my other responsibilities. So I think that's really what happened is I had a conversation and it wasn't, I would see the doctor, my physician, my blood sugars were out of whack, my cholesterol was out of whack, blood pressure was out of whack. None of that mattered. It didn't, that wasn't what happened. That wasn't what was the nidus. My why was I never wanted to go through that pain of being rejected again. So that's what it took for me. Now, Dennis and I have been talking about this quite a bit. My why has changed, right? And I've had another paradigm shift. And that new paradigm shift is, now I want to stay where I'm at because I like the way I feel, but I also want to become resistant to getting dead. Like I say that in jest, but really it's about living the best life that I can now for whatever I have left. So
that's an interesting kind of perspective that you bring. I really like how you kind of bring in that kind of human, personal aspect to your life that I think a lot of people don't go. And I know we're entering into deeper waters here. As a pirate, that's what I do. But as your Socratic pirate. And so, Dennis, I'm going to put that question in a similar kind of way, but for a way that might be more relevant to kind of your experiences. I think I had read that you were a writer. And I think as any writer would know, those beginning few pages, or even that moment when you're looking at it, before you would literally write, but now you just look at the screen and it's blank and you say, I have writer's block and I don't know what the hell I'm going to write about. And then there's that moment where you say, oh wait, I have an idea, and then you start to write that on paper, and then you start to write another thing on paper, and pretty soon you're 100 pages in, you're like, I have an amazing idea here. I think it's similar to what Dr. Gauthier is saying, in that there's that paradigm shift of all of a sudden, now I'm going to do it. Maybe can you talk a little bit about kind of that microcosm of like when you have an idea as a writer, and then how does that sort of balloon into something really great? Or how do you have that confidence to put those ideas on paper? You know you have those ideas in your head, but how do you put them on a paper to really articulate those, to have that kind of writer's confidence? Can you speak a little bit to that?
It's interesting. Sometimes it's a lot of reflection, sitting down. I let everything pull together and I let it marinate for a little while.
Right.
And then when it comes. I don't know why.
Right.
And then, I've written several children's books, and I sit with it for a couple days, and it's just like all of a sudden it just comes together and it's there. But then there's those times where there are those blocks where you just can't get anything out for some reason. Sometimes it's a little research, sometimes it's diving in a little bit deeper to the individuals that we are working with in a project. But, it's just sometimes having the confidence in yourself to get your best product out there. And sometimes it's a lot better than you really think it is. So sometimes you can lack a little bit of self-confidence when you're working on something, even when it's a new topic that might be a little bit foreign to you.
Right. No, and you're probably, the listeners, like, why the hell is he talking about writing and losing weight? But the thing that really stands out to me in both of these stories is that you start from nothing on a paper and you go to something. You start from inaction to action. It's that moment that says, okay, now I'm going to go and start taking action here. And that's the moment that I feel like a lot of people are really stuck in when they're on a personal journey, is that they're always sitting on the couch, or they're always standing there saying, I really want, they know what they have to do. They know they have to go out and exercise. They know they have to change their diet. Their doctor has talked to them about this, but it's that moment of, okay, when am I going to actually get out there and do that? So I think that those are some interesting kind of insights there.
It's interesting. I was very active growing up. I played basketball, played baseball in college. I'd play 3 to 4 hours a day, lift. Then when I hit 30, all of a sudden, and I always ate quite a bit. I loved to eat, never put weight on. Then all of a sudden the metabolism changed when I hit 30. And when the metabolism changed, I didn't change my eating habits, but I married 27 years now, family of 4. Life got extremely busy. I didn't have the time to devote to working out. Actually, I didn't think I had the time.
Right.
And I tried diets, weight would just come right back on. So it wasn't until December 15th when I embarked on this journey where I realized that it is possible. And a phrase I use on here a lot is go time. And I say that because it is go time, not only for this podcast, but for the journey I've been on. And there's no looking back.
Right, no. I think there's that interesting thing that you had mentioned. I think it was like burn the boats or something. We're going to burn the boats so you don't go, right?
Yeah. So like for me, one of the things that, when I'm coaching people is I say, you have to have such a compelling reason why you want to do something. And for me, it was about the pain of inaction was worse than the pain of action, right? And that's a take on the burn the boats, where we're talking about, an invading army. I think it's old Greek mythology or Greek, Trojan type stuff. But I think the saying goes, the invading army shows up, and the first order from the general is burn the boats. And one of his soldiers says, hey, how are we getting home? He says, well, you got to win the war. And you can't hide any boats down in the bushes over there. You can't hide them over there. You can't say, oh, well, just in case I'm going to have this, contingency plan. You just have to go all in 100%. And I think really for me, it was the pain of inaction was worse than the pain of action.
That's an interesting sort of idea, that the pain of inaction is sort of what brought you to kind of, coming to action. I think that's an interesting kind of perspective that you bring there. I want to maybe take us a little bit out of deeper waters. Let's move this pirate ship into Caribbean waters here, a little bit warmer territory. I know that you had mentioned, Dr. Gauthier, that you were a part of a rock band. I've actually seen that rock band play. It was called Midnight Angel. It was really cool. But Dennis, I know that you as well were really involved in hip hop. And as you look around here, there's all sorts of different really cool album art from artists I probably have not listened to because they're probably before my time, but nonetheless really cool. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of how music has brought you two together, and how you kind of use music in your lives to kind of express I guess, your goals and kind of achieved your goals? You know, every workout comes with a good soundtrack, but kind of how has music influenced your lives?
Oh, well, I mean, it's been ubiquitous in my life, right? I'm a big rock and roll fan. I do like some hip hop as well. Like certainly Run DMC is one of my favorites. We also had Paris Smith of EPMD in here, another great hip hop act. But mostly my love is rock music, and that's because my chosen instrument is guitar. And some of the best guitarists in the world are part of rock bands, and wherever I am, I need to have a soundtrack going at all times, right? And I'm just a lover of music, and all of my close friends are all music fans of all kinds, right? And we connect on that level. We go to shows together, and I know Dennis and I just enjoy going and seeing shows together. We've gone to a bunch since December, right?
It's a lot of fun,
right? And music is like, for me, is like what emotions sound like. Right, that's how deep it goes for me, and a lot of times, music can actually set the tone for my day, and it can change my state in a moment. So for me, it's like I can't imagine a life without it.
You know, I grew up in a house. My father was a drummer. My mother was a lover of Motown. We always had the 8 tracks going in the house, and I remember in 1984 when my mother. There was a store that you've probably never heard of called Caldors. She came out with a tape, and it was Run DMC, the Run DMC album. And she said, I think this is the new Motown. And I fell in love with hip-hop. And it just always seemed right. Back in the day, hip-hop, a lot of people thought it would just be a fad. Now it's the number one genre of music, which is amazing that it moved to that direction. About 10 years ago, I had the honor of being connected with Paris Smith from EPMD. He was looking for somebody to write his biography. A couple days later, he and I connected. The biography has been done. We're just, I think we're getting pretty close to the release date, and I've had the pleasure of interviewing a lot of different individuals in the music industry over the last 10 years, talking about his life, talking about his contributions to music, not only his but theirs, and just learning a lot of the ins and outs of the industry. And it's fascinating. I've taught a class in college called The Evolution of Hip Hop, which has been really cool to share with the students. We've had some really good musical people that are pretty prominent in the industry speak to my students. So it's been a lot of fun. And one of my former students is Joyner Lucas, who is doing amazing things in the music industry. One of the fastest rising hip hop artists. He's in movies now, and it's been great watching his meteoric rise through entertainment.
No, it's interesting because for a little bit of historical irony, well, it's great to hear, first of all, about kind of how hip-hop has kind of inspired the people that you kind of educated, Anna Maria, and as well, I mean, rock and roll music is a staple of everything that you do, so It's very interesting. For a little bit of a comedic footnote here, I don't listen to hip-hop or to rock music. I actually like opera and classical music, so clearly I would echo everything that my father says, but I would just say that I do it in a very different, probably the most different way that you can. But that's I think I would agree with everything that you had said there. I think I have another kind of question here. I'll pivot a little bit. In the achieving of any sort of apex, there's always those valleys, those parts where you fall and you have to pick yourself back up. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of, for both of you, can you tell me about a big struggle that you may have had in your lives, somewhere where you really just like hit the sand and had to get yourself back up? Because that often happens in a struggle to kind of achieve kind of an apex, is you see that apex part, right, where it's like, oh my gosh, they did everything they did right, and you don't necessarily see all the bumps and all the scrapes on the road. Can you tell me a little bit about one of those moments where you really, really just pounded the sand?
Well, we're headed back into deep waters now. This is
very deep. We more than 2 fathoms deep, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, right. So I can think of 2 right off the bat. One, I had done a lot to build my businesses. At one point, I had a internet company that I had, put together and basically sold off, and had some commercial properties, and had my businesses, and then the next thing I know, I was thrown into the court system and the divorce machine. So all of that became, was put at risk. everything from having to sell everything off, perhaps, to going into extreme debt to do the payouts. So without getting into too much of the gruesome details of the court system, that was one big hurdle, and that was probably, I think it was back in 2016 when that finished up. And then fast forward to 2020. So 4 years later, I'm starting to feel pretty good about things, have multiple businesses again, rebuilt a little bit, and then the world stopped. Right? And then I said, okay, what do we do? Doing what I do, we were mandated to shut down for 3 months, right? And then you have all these different businesses, and you're leveraged, and you have banks knocking on your door, and there's no patience. Right, so certainly you have some savings and such, right? Some working capital, but then what happens is it dries up real quick because the mortgages are still due. We didn't know that PPP and EIDL and all those things were going to come out. Like, they were literally building the life raft as the ship was sinking. Lo and behold, it ended up being one of the best things. So that was probably the scariest part of my career, but it ended up being the best part. Because that's when I made a decision to divest a lot of what I had and go back to basics and basically shave down my practice to the one that I originally built. And I've never been happier, actually. So, but during that time, I mean, Joshua, you could probably, you witnessed it.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a stressful time, but I was
For
at
sure.
home
Right.
doing online school, so I didn't have
Right.
as much of the thing, but you could
Right.
definitely witness it. Dennis, could you tell me a little bit more about a time in your life that you maybe hit the sand?
Well, definitely for me, it was 17 years old. I was playing high school basketball, entering senior year, and was the best year looking at colleges, and then I got really sick. And I found out I had Crohn's disease, spent several months in the hospital, not eating, not drinking, and kind of turned my life upside down, and I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. And over the next, now you say 35 years, it's been kind of a challenge up and down, had a couple surgeries, shift medication up and down, trying to find the right diets and everything. And that's provided a lot of obstacles along the way and a lot of different challenges that, I would not consider to be typical. What I will say throughout this transformation, I've really found a great balance, and it's the healthiest I've felt in years. So I never thought, as much as diet is connected to what you do, when you start to feel better about yourself, everything pulls together. But, I knew nothing about Crohn's before I found out I had Crohn's, and it's a challenge, but, got to take the challenges on.
Right. And one of the things that I kind of, took from both of those responses was this idea that actually sometimes your greatest struggle can actually be the birth of something new. I like to think of this image, I think you actually have it tattooed on you, as this idea of the phoenix rising from the ashes, is that, or even like some forests require a fire in order to then, grow anew. Have you found, or what would you tell your listeners in terms of failure? I think a lot of people will fear failure, when they're trying to embark on a new journey. I think the idea is, I could start to try and lose weight, or I could try this new entrepreneurial venture, or I could try doing this new hobby, but I could fail. In terms of failure, what is some advice that you could give to some of your listeners from your own experiences in terms of, should you fear failure, or should you embrace it, and kind of can sometimes failure allow you to really open your lives up?
One of my favorite things, best basketball player of all time, is Michael Jordan. What individuals don't look at a lot is he's missed more shots than anybody in the history of basketball. But that's not what people look at. They look at he had to miss those shots to become successful. Along the way, you're going to miss a lot of shots, and you're going to have a lot of struggles. But it's, I remember back in, I think it was 2000, I was a high school basketball coach looking for that job. I thought I'd be the next big coach. I didn't get a job I wanted. That night I was very upset, and then a professional opportunity opened up that propelled the next 25 years of my life. So when one door closes, sometimes another door opens. And you can't, when you are afraid of failure, you're going to miss opportunities.
Right.
And my favorite quote of all time is by Norman Vincent Peale. Minds are like parachutes. They only work when they're open.
Right.
I thought I had all the ideas, but mine weren't working. Then Dr. G and I connected, and it's in terms of transforming, and it finally works. So you got to be persistent and just can't give up.
Right. No, absolutely.
Yeah, so I would say on that same note, fail fast and fail often, because you're going to learn a lot every time you fail, right? You learn how not to do something, right? And the faster you fail, the faster you're going to get to where you want to go. And you need those failures in order to grow. Like, you can't just come out of the gate being like amazing, right? You have to learn how not, like we actually today we're just using a new interface here, and we had to scrap it and go back to the old way because I couldn't do what we thought we would be able to do and be able to show up on time, right? So I kind of failed, but I learned that I shouldn't be doing that in this situation, right?
Right.
So that's just a little bit of an example of that. But yeah, I mean, failing often is like, I have this ready, fire, aim mentality where I say, okay, like, we're going to start a podcast. I literally said to Dennis, like in January, I'm like, yeah, we're going to start a podcast. Can you imagine? Like, I would never have known 4 years ago that we would have had a podcast that we now have, 12,500 followers in 6 weeks. So, I mean, we failed a lot to get here, but we're on the upswing right now.
One part of that as well is that I think we trust each other in terms of where our talents are. This guy's the brains behind. He's the engineer, the producer, and I always like to say, one of the jokes we say is, I'm like that guy that's selling candy bars, and the guy. We just, and that's part of it. But the viewer may not see. There's been failures along the way that only we may see, or maybe they did see them. But that's how you're getting better. One of my favorite things, and I'm going to go back to my little sports theme for a second. When you're on your way to your apex, in sports, you have a team that wins, and they win the championship. Next year, same team, same everything. They're not playing well, and they're not even close. They forgot what it took to get there, and that's part of it as well. So when you're doing things, you got to remember the blood, sweat, and tears, because everything's not guaranteed, and you have to continue that pursuit. And I think that's one of the struggles that goes along the way, is when you want to remain consistent. I know on my pursuit, it's getting up every morning at 4:30, going for a walk 7 days a week, rain, and I didn't start it during the summer. I started it during the winter. No matter what. That's consistency. I couldn't imagine another way. I know if I turn back the other way, I'm going to head back in the other direction. So I think you really have to remember how you got there and stay consistent.
Yeah, consistency is huge, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things that was hard for me in the process of losing 200 pounds, right? Being ultra consistent with what you're doing is super important. But then, a week will go by, you'll weigh in, and you've maybe even gained a pound, even though you've done everything right? And a lot of that has to do with water retention and all that, but still understanding that you have to keep going forward and believe that you're going to end up where you need to go. So you have to already see it in your head. You have to visualize that you're going to be there, right? And I did a lot of visualization. And there's a lot of times where I'd be down in the pain cave in the basement, and I'd be trying to do a PR or whatever, and I just wouldn't hit it, right? But the fact is, the following week I might have.
Or kind of take away from kind of one of your responses. But one of the things that I really thought was interesting that you had said, Dennis, was kind of keeping an open mind when you go through things. How has this podcast kind of opened your perspective in lives, or open your perspective on lives with the people that you've kind of interviewed?
Everybody's different that's coming in. And everybody has offered something extremely different and different perspectives. And we earlier on we were speaking, I talked about that everybody has unique qualities, and I think that's a beautiful thing in the world, is seeing what people are really good at.
Right.
In seeing that the way people reach their apex that their journey may be different, and oftentimes, on my journey, I think human nature is we think our way is the only way to do things, but that's not the case.
Right.
And as an educator, and I just want to go back to education for a second. When I started 30 years ago, I was working at Devereux School in Rutland, Massachusetts, and I've always been really good connecting with students. And there was a veteran teacher next door to me, Dee Moran. I'm going to give him a shout out. Every time I do something with a student, he'd say, "What'd you do?" I'm like, "Well, I did this." He's like, "Cool." He did this every day for like 2 weeks. And then finally I said, "Am I doing something wrong?" And he said, "That's the problem with you guys today." He said, "How do you think I've made it through 30 years? And I'm like, "Because you're the GOAT." And he's like, "No, because I look at what you do, and how you make connections. And if I'm unable to connect, I learn from you away." And to me, that's what's been really good, not only in life as an educator, but through this podcast, is watching everybody and seeing what they're doing and seeing if I can find a new way to be better at myself and get better at life.
Interesting. Yeah, no.
Yeah, for me, it's very similar to that, but I feel like it gives me a insight into other people's mindsets, and I try to see what I can relate to, and what's, what has it that I can't relate to, and the things that I can't relate to, I dig into that a little bit because there's something in there for me to learn, right? And I think the mindset of someone who's achieving is going to be similar, depending, even with whatever walk of life they have, and I try to figure out what it is that I can take away from that.
Bob, what I think is interesting is, this is a whole new world for you and I, the podcast. When you come to the engineering part, if you don't know that answer, you're going to have it in a couple days.
Yeah.
Or a couple minutes, couple hours, and
Yeah.
that has a lot to do with your success. Is you're persistent.
Yeah, I don't give up. I don't give up easy. That's for sure. Persistence is definitely in my vocabulary. It's part of who I am.
It's a great thing.
Well, it's interesting that we were on this kind of theme of open-mindedness. I think one of the things that I've learned a lot from you, Dr. Gauthier, is reading a lot of books and, absorbing a lot of information from people that are also successful in learning in that way through a podcast or through other mediums and things. Who have been, I guess let me phrase this in a way that's more fun. If you could meet or you could spend a day with someone, a famous person or someone that maybe has influenced your life with philosophy, who would that person that you'd spend the day with? What questions would you ask them? And why would you spend that day with them?
That's a big question. There's a lot of data in there, right?
Right.
There's so many people. I think at this phase in my life, and I think it would be different depending on what phase of my life, but I think this phase of my life, I think I'd probably want to talk and spend the day with David Goggins, quite frankly, right? I think that guy is built just a little differently than the rest of us. And I would probably ask him, one of the things he talks about is sometimes he sits in the morning and just stares at his running shoes and doesn't want to go do it. Now, this guy runs a minimum, I don't even know what it is. I think it's like 10 or 15 miles a day minimum. Every single day, and I would ask him, does he really not take days off? That's the one thing that kind of, because what he puts out there doesn't really address time off. Like he says, you got to train before you can overtrain, and I've taken that quite literally, and done, I've done 75 hard a couple of times. I know Dennis is doing it now, and the tenet of that is, two workouts a day, no matter what. One has to be outside, and that sounds like right up the alley of David Goggins. I think in other parts of my life, I probably would want to talk to probably Warren Buffett, and he's been at this game longer than anyone else, and he's probably been arguably one of the most successful. I would just try to pick his brain and say, hey, how did you, for the long term, decide what you were going to invest in, why, and how do you stay the course even through storms, and how do you navigate that? But that's just kind of two of them right there. Interestingly, neither one of them are musicians, right?
Mine are two very different people. First, Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa is, obviously she's, passed years ago, but she's from Calcutta, India, and she lived her life serving the poor, the sick in Calcutta. And she took care of people that others would just walk by. And she devoted her life to that. And that's just such an amazing thing. And my whole life has been dedicated to serving others and to seeing someone just looking at everybody as equals and trying to help individuals feel good. I think that's amazing. And just to get into our mind. Other one is Kobe Bryant. You know, a really good documentary I enjoyed was Muse. And one of the things that he talked about was he worked out 3 times a day. He'd get up at 4 in the morning, work out at 8, work out again later. And what he said is, while he was doing this throughout his, I just say it's a 15 to 20 year career, he was working out 3 times a day. Other athletes might be working out once or some days not. So he would get better that much faster because of the work he was putting in. Now, he had that natural born athletic ability, but he did something with it. And, athletically, in music, you see individuals that have the talent and they don't do anything with it. He took it, and that's what brought him. His success did not come because it was handed to him. And I think that's a great thing, that to be driven. And hey, and he's had personal failures along the way. He had where he professionally, he didn't win a championship, made him work that much harder. And I think those are the things that we can learn by in life, is the more work you put in personally, professionally, athletically, whatever it is, you're going to get better results.
Interesting. And actually, one of the things that I have 2 more questions for you guys as we kind of wrap up here today. But one of the themes that you had talked about as well was this idea of when to take breaks, or if breaks are even involved in that equation at all. Does that, I like to think of us running around an Indianapolis 500 rink where we go around and around in a circle, and sometimes we need to go and pit. At a pit crew, change our tires, make sure that they don't blow, things like that. What is the role of that pit crew in your life, or do you even need to pit at all? Or is that even a right analogy? Do you have to take breaks? When do you take breaks, and what is the role of those breaks if you take them at all?
Well, can I just this one's a great one. So when I started my transformation, there's 2 people, and they actually live in the same house, that helped me out with my breaks. I was about 3 weeks in my journey, and I felt guilty taking a day off. Your fiancée, Sarah, was like, Dennis, it's okay. Rest your body. You need it. Your body's telling you. And it was better the next day. Then I went through the 8-week challenge. And Dr. G was saying, Dennis, if you keep going, your body's not going to reset. And I needed to hear that, because I thought if I took a second off, that I would go back. And I think that's the fear. Once you develop consistency, any break will help you go backwards. And I'm in a 75 hard now, where there isn't a pit stop for 75 days. But on the outside of your challenge or the 75 hard, you need that pit stop to reboot and get ready. And you and Sarah are the 2 that gave me that.
Yeah, I struggle with that, actually. I struggle with that in all facets of my life, right? One of the things, and I mirror your same thing, where you feel like you're going to fall into bad habits, and it is Sarah that keeps reeling me back in to tell me to take the break, and this is a person who does ultra marathons, so I think she knows something about recovery and such, right? But even in my studies, when I was learning to do dentistry, it was not uncommon for me to stay up till 3 a.m. studying, then turn around and go to school at 6 a.m. and take an exam, like days on end, right? So I tend to have a propensity to not stop once I start moving forward, but it is vitally important for longevity. I have found I've done a lot of weightlifting over the past 4 years, and that's kind of the secret to my success with my transformation, is building more of a metabolic base, and we can talk about that in another podcast. But by doing that, I need to give my body a chance to recover. It's not like doing cardio after cardio session after cardio session. You can recover after that, but weightlifting, all the connective tissues, all the muscle, all of that has to rebuild after the insult that you give it. So I basically will do 5 to 6 weeks of heavy weightlifting, progressively overloading each week, and then I take a deload week where I'm doing, basically half the volume that I once did. I have to learn to do that with my professional practice as well. Sometimes I can keep piling on the continuing education, and even with this podcast, I can tend to lean into that in such a way that other parts of my life, start to become out of balance. But right now, the focus of my life is trying to get everything back into balance, and actually Sarah's instrumental in that.
Well, shout out to Sarah, everyone, and to those folks at home that can be that pit crew for you, and for your role in being their pit crew in their own journeys as well. Speaking of journeys, my second to last question here, if that is in fact the second to last question, I might get another one, but we'll keep it at that, is we've talked a lot about kind of reaching this apex. Your podcast is called Apex Lifestyles. It's about kind of reaching the pinnacle of your apex and things. Someone had, I think a comedian had told me, or I had read online this idea that your life is kind of like a puzzle, and we have on one side you kind of have your personal life and your relationships and your friendship. You have your kind of romantic life with other people. You have your career and your goals, and you have your like spiritual life. And each parts of these are like little puzzle pieces, and you're trying to put the puzzle pieces in, and eventually you can try and find kind of how to get there. And that was something that I kind of used as a heuristic kind of like defining success for my life. But how do you define kind of the apex? Is it a puzzle like that? Is it one part of your life, the other? Is the role of Apex Lifestyles to kind of work on that entire puzzle, or is it to work on one specific aspect? How do you define the apex for your listeners?
For me, it's about putting all those pieces together. So earlier in my life, I really focused in on one area at a time, and I actually have this thought. It's almost like went into my head and pulled this out. I worked on one area of my life at a time, and I perfected what the vision was for that area of my life, one part at a time. And now for the past 4 or 5 years, I've been trying to build the whole, right? And being able to figure out, how do I create this life? And I like I said, I always start with the end in mind. Say, where do I want to go, and how do I want it to look in great detail in my own mind, and then I take steps to doing that. So for me, creating the apex is not just the point on the top of one thing. It's actually more like a cone, right? So it's the entirety of your life, all facets of it, and where do each of those puzzle pieces fit, right? And at what point, where does your professional life, your physical life, your spiritual life, your romantic life, your family life, where does that all? What parts of that puzzle do they all, create this whole? And not only that, I think during different parts and phases of your life, they're different. So you have to keep reassessing that over time.
I can't answer that any better. I think something that I want to add to that along the way, when you're doing your personal success, professional success on your journeys, the most important thing, you can't forget or neglect those that are around you that are important to you. Because the easiest thing is, whether it's your spouse, your family, your close friends, all of a sudden you forget their significance in what you're doing in life. And time is precious. You always got to set apart time. And I'll say one of the things that I've done in my life sometimes, because I go 100 miles an hour from the second I wake up to the second I go to bed, but sometimes taking a deep breath, making sure that you make that time, because you can't get time back. So you have to make sure you put that time there in making sure that you have a full, complete life. Because you know what? Without that, there's going to be some emptiness, and it's not a great thing.
Interesting. I think we've kind of defined here what the apex is, and that'll kind of lead into my last question for you today on Pirate Radio as we kind of dock this ship back into port. Have you guys reached your apex? And if you have, or if you haven't, what's next for Apex Lifestyles and for Dr. Robert Gauthier and for Dennis Van Ness?
No, I haven't. I think that I'm an evolving journey. In that, I've reached my apex in certain areas in my life. I as an educator, I think that I like to say I'm always headed there, but students keep you honest. And what I've learned is whenever you think, I'm really good at connecting, when you think you're there, you're not. So that's always changing and evolving. And the person I was 30 years ago in my profession, I'm a lot different than I am now. For this podcast, I think possibilities are endless. I think it's embracing all the individuals out there and helping our viewers see through the lens of others, something that can help them reach their apex and allow them to grab onto something to reach their personal success. So we're not even close to reaching the apex here. It's just the beginning, and love having everybody on for the journey.
Yeah, I agree with you. I can definitely say that I share the same view. I don't think I'm at my apex either. I think I still got a lot of run room. That said, memento mori, right? So you are mortal, right? So there is some time that, the runway ends, right? So we got to do the best we can with what we have now, right? And for me, I think what's next for Apex Lifestyles is we're creating a movement where people can actually say, yeah, you know what? It's okay for me to go and be the best version of myself, right? And I'm going to buck the trend and not necessarily listen to the zeitgeist out in the superconscious of the society. And I'm going to go do what I want to do and be the best version of that that I can be. With that, we have a website launching in the next week or so.
Looks good.
Right? We have a bunch of other projects coming up. That's what I'm going to leave it at. But yeah, I think that there's a lot to be said on this podcast, and I think I'm really, really happy with the response we've gotten so far, and it's beyond my expectations. Actually, it's really taken off in a way that I didn't have an expectation of.
I agree, 100%.
Yeah, so
it's great.
Yeah, look forward to some really cool stuff coming.
Awesome. Well, unlike you guys, I have reached my apex in my life. I've just 20 years old. I've done it.
You're there.
No, I'm kidding. Right, I'm there. I've done it. I'm going to graduate in a semester, so I've clearly reached my apex. No, I think that's a great idea of you don't necessarily reach your apex, and I don't really know if you actually reach that self-actualization, or maybe you do at some point, but always just feeling I can. I'm never truly there, or maybe I am, or maybe I'm not. But I feel like if you're in that place, you're so full of hubris, you probably haven't actually made it. Well, this is the end of my pirate podcast here today. I'll hand it back over, the reins of this ship back over to Dennis and Dr. Gauthier. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to interview you both today, and I'm an avid listener, so I'm excited to see where it goes.
All right. Well, thank you, Joshua, for coming in. I appreciate you drove all the way out from the outskirts of Massachusetts down into, Northborough land, and I just dropped where we are, so there it is.
Yeah, I just want to, you're a phenomenal young man. I mean, in your, you say 20 years, you are so much more mature than a 20-year-old. You have done some amazing things, and just for you to hop in the chair today and you have your go button too, and you went, and it's been an honor getting to know you more today and see you actually dive in, pick our brains, and push our buttons a little bit today. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on, and to everyone out there, it's go time.
Yeah, well, before that, right, where can they follow you?
Actually, there is no place that you can follow me. I actually just deleted my Instagram account. So
all right, well, maybe that gets cut out. Yeah.
So there's that. I don't really. I'm on my journey to reaching my apex. I've decided that I'm cutting that out of my life. So yeah.
Okay. Very good. Well, Dennis, it's been a pleasure to get the roles reversed on us.
Absolutely.
Right, and we had a great host.
Amazing.
And much luck to you, my young Padawan. Right, and as always,
it's go time, guys.
It's go time. Let's go.